let it fly?
Let's go.
Okay, then you're all set. Okay. Well, anyway, in thinking about what to try and get across today or try and talk about, at least with you, one of the things that came to mind was the idea of the music that I'm doing now. At times it's, I wonder, you know, is it classical music or is it not? Is it popular music or what is it? It's pretty hard to define. And along that line, I think that it explains it better if I can deal with where I was coming from when coming out here, with the idea that we'd been doing pieces of avant-garde music from the European repertoire. I was fascinated with Stockhausen, had performed those works, had worked with a number of American composers, had done various styles, had worked on Terry Riley, Steve Reich, Phil Glass, who else? Stacy Bowers pieces. Carles Santos was another one, that very interesting guy. Anyway, we were doing those pieces. We did them at the Walker. We saw some of and performed in the New Music America things. So we were looking very much that scene. And coming out here, I was faced with different things. But it was a nice chance to start to make things happen out here and have a feel for what is here.
Were there any musical reasons for coming to the West Coast?
Well, for me it was, when I had finished my training, surviving was, you know, I needed a job. I wanted a steady job. I could have survived certainly doing what I was doing, but I wanted a steady job. And I'd been trained to be a university professor, so I thought I could do that. And I had no plans on where to go. I applied for every job in the country that was there, and ASU called first, you know, and so, and they said, let's do it, and I said, fine, I'm happy to be here. So, you know, I came out for that, but after that it was learning to meet the musicians here and start up all over again, building another ensemble, and working with people and doing the music rather than just writing.
You said to me in an earlier conversation there seemed to be a tremendous Spanish influence.
Spanish out here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's very apparent. It's like anything else, though. It takes time to find people. You know, I've been playing out here for 8 years, I guess. And we've done concerts all over the state by this time. We've had a lot of fun doing them, but in every case it's been a situation of learning to find more people, more contacts, performances at the Mars Gallery, for instance. We were meeting some people there, and then 5 years later I found myself going back to the Mars Gallery for a poetry reading with Tito Rios and picking out logos for a Spanish cantata, Tito Say, that we were doing. So there's kind of a circle there. Working with Mark Sunkett, where then he developed into his African heritage and is studying African drumming. You know, now that's coming back, and he's kind of educating me about that in the dance. Working with Nouveau West, that orchestra, I did 2 pieces with them. And their conductor, Terry Williams, is the one that introduced me to Carlos. And in fact, she was instrumental in saying to Canyon Records, I think you should commission a work for Carlos for your 35th anniversary. And I think that the writer that you want is right here. And so she introduced me, and that worked out, and we did that piece.
Had you heard any works by Carlos prior to that?
No, I hadn't. I was not aware of what he was doing, so I mean, I became aware. They gave me a lot of tapes, and they said, think about it and see what you think you can do. And I listened, and I said, yeah, I think I can get something to work.
And even the use of the Navajo flute in your music?
Oh, that was tricky, but you know, the thing that, this is good, because what I was trying to get at earlier was, in order to make those things work, in order to be able to score them into a piece, there needed to be a way of, you know, a technical way to do it, and with the freedom and the flexibility to let one line float where the rest of it's moving, and let these different things coexist. That's what came out of the 60s. A lot of the scores that we did in like contemporary ensembles and so forth, that when we were doing them I thought, I'll never use this information. This is just crazy. I started working with Carlos, and those were the techniques that made it work.
So what you're saying is what you're doing now is not a new venture in music?
Well, I don't think so. I think it builds on the tradition that, on the classical tradition, but it's quite different than, what can I say? It's not a conservative view of the classical music at all. I mean, I can't say my thread comes directly from Webern at all, but I think in a larger sense, it's notated music, and the notation and ways of making work come from the 60s scores, that style of scoring and so forth. There's a lot of, different feels. It's not purely a European thing anymore. I think when I was performing classical music before, so much of it was European. We kept feeling, if we could only get to Europe and do these things, and if we could only get, more of Stockhausen's scores and study more and more of this stuff. And once I came out here, I began to feel that, I can create classical music, but create it out here, and it's not so much, it's not purely European.
Going back to what you said earlier, have you then found that what Carles can provide for you is a kind of key?
Yeah, in a way, but the key works in a funny way. The key works in a way that pushes you in another direction. I don't know, it's like keys sometimes open doors, and certainly he's done that. But there's also a necessity, so that in doing the symphony, sitting down for that, I knew the sort of things I wanted to have in there, and then I knew the problems that had to be solved. And by the time I had finished solving the problems so that everything would work, figuring out all the keys, all the modulations, everything, the timing, so that when we land in this section where Carlos will play, we're ready for that serenity that's going to come when he plays, this sort of thing. Once those kinds of things were solved, and once I'd had a chance to write some of the music that I wanted in there as well, the piece was done. So
you now have a pattern for pieces of music from now on?
Well, a pattern maybe, but every piece would be different. I mean, I really don't know what's coming after we finish the recording. I don't know. We'll keep playing, I'm sure, but with Carlos, each piece is different, though. Yeah.
And you said that you didn't know anything about him until this particular person suggested you wrote for him. And what was the response?
I was delighted. I was so glad to meet more musicians. That's the most fun. I mean, that's always fun. And here was a chance to have a project to work on. A lot of times you meet people, but you don't have anything to do together. And here's someone saying, we want you guys to work together, So we get to sit down and practice together and improvise a bit and figure out how things work. And then we have a reason to work together. And that's fun.
You said things being scored, in kind of classical music sense, and yet yesterday you mentioned during the rehearsal you needed to almost forget about your part, concentrate on what Mark was doing, so you could start to play to him, suggesting almost an improvisational.
Oh, I see. Well, that's true, but in classical music, I always feel like your focus, your mental focus, is floating, in the sense of, you zero in on different things. And what I was getting at there is that in yesterday's rehearsal, I had to concentrate so much on watching everyone else's part, because that's on my score when I'm playing, that I just felt the desire just to relax and play the music and really just enjoy being a little more musical with it. There's some, it's like, the same thing would be true if you were accompanying in a classical situation, where if you're just playing, if it's a Mozart, whatever, and you're playing the accompaniment for that, but you're also watching that vocalist line, saying, is she going to make it, or is he going to make it, or what's going to happen? That's different than when you go out to perform and they're just, you're on your own. I'm going to sit down and enjoy playing this. You're past the point of worrying about who's ever playing, that you're coming for.
Well, you've chosen the role of composer.
Yeah.
You're in there because you want to be.
Yeah.
Therefore, the cost isn't too high.
You mean of all the worry?
Being the leader, the person with the band.
I'm not very comfortable in that. I've never felt like I was a very good leader. I really, I don't think that's true. But I think whoever is getting in and making things happen is the leader, you know. So that, like conducting with Frank Spinoza for on the symphony, that I never really thought about. I mean, it was fun. It was a lot of fun to do it, but most of the time it was problem solving. Again, cleaning everything up, you know, making it happen, until finally you get a few moments in there that you can just enjoy it and just let it cruise. But in terms of, you know, being the leader and saying it's got to be this way, that day may come. But at this point, I'm just trying to clarify things so much.
You're being a teacher.
Yeah, I suppose, because, you know, when you write a piece of music, no one's ever heard it before. And, you know, people they have no idea what it's supposed to sound like. And often what they imagine to be the case can be so far away from what you're trying to get at.
Even though it's scored?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, they'll play the notes, but it's how they play the notes, how they make it feel. A thing yesterday, Alex was playing right up the scale, and I was just thinking, you know, everything's right, but that's not the feel that we want. We want to pull that out. Let's make it a more Arabic feel, you know, give it a little looseness, maybe a little busty quality. That's the sort of thing that has to happen. And a lot of it is just fixing notes. I mean, there are mistakes in the parts often. There shouldn't be, but there always are. So once you've gotten all that done, set the tempo.
And that's where we go to Mark and the drum.
Yeah. Okay, now with Mark and the drum, what I'm saying there is, let's get it to the point where I can just sit down and play with Mark and just and not have to be the director anymore. And we'll just all play together. That's what I was getting at there. That's what I wanted.
How about discussing a bit more about the nature of the beat?
Oh yeah, we were talking, yeah. Well, that's something that's become more and more interesting to me. Again, coming from music in the sort of extreme, radical avant-garde that had no beat at all, and working with scores like that, the more that I worked with Mark, I would say, the more I became appreciative of that beat. And then at a certain point, I think I finally felt that I wasn't going to try and impress anybody with the music, but I was going to finally satisfy myself, so that when I put on the recording, when I was done with the piece, I liked it. And I thought, odds are that if I'm happy, someone else will like it. I'm not going to worry about who that is. And then, you know, once that became apparent, then I thought, well, how am I going to do that? And that's when I became really interested in watching that beat and how it feels, how it flows. And I don't mean like you know, the piece that you heard yesterday does go straight through. Even the symphony is more classically formed so that it's a straight section of one movement and a straight part to another. But even in a piece like the cantatas, pieces like the cantatas, where there's a lot of flexibility in the beat is still important, so that you flow on things, you come to a point of rest, and then it flows again. And getting that flow to feel just right and natural, that's not easy. That's very challenging. So I thought that was fascinating. To that end, you know, which notes you choose probably isn't so important anymore.
Given what you've just said about finding to please yourself, one of the quotes I have here from Arizona Republic, January of 1989. When I compose these days, I try to choose the right things, something people will want to hear and musicians will want to play.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes it, the only thing that's funny about that, it makes it sound like I'm just writing to please an audience, and that's not true at all. I mean, I want to please them. I have no reason to insult people with my music. I don't want to do that. But I'm looking for a part of, maybe the good part of life, and finding things that are attractive, but attractive for a reason. I'm not sure how to put it, but in choosing materials, I think you can choose a lot of things. And I haven't spent a lot of my time expressing sorrow in my music. Not because sorrow doesn't exist, but the trouble with sorrow is that it's sorrowful. And it's a hard item to really deal with. And I think if I was as honest about the sorrow as I would be about the joy, I think it would be too hard to deal with in some ways. But there's also a very good side to life that can come through in the music, and there are moments in the music that there are times I can get really excited about what I'm doing. I mean, it's thrilling, it's exciting, but it doesn't happen all the time. It didn't happen yesterday.